Welcome to Front Office Bros. Today we're going to be talking about Dynasty trade targets. We like to call this speed trading. How it works is we will review a player's value on keep, trade, cut, and then tell you whether we would trade for or trade away the player. With us today is a special guest making his first appearance on Front Office Pros, which is none other than Vignesh Doraiswamy. Vig has recently become a part of the Football Guys staff and is a co-host on the Pretend GM show with Alfredo Brown. Vig, welcome, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Dude, thanks for having me. This is such a blast.
Hike!
Since Vig is a medical doctor by trade, he will be our resident doctor as we ask him for his sports medicine perspective on players who finished the season on IR last year and how it affects their dynasty value going forward. First up is running back Javonte Williams. I know Joe will be very interested in what you have to say on here, Vig. Javonte Williams suffered a torn ACL, PCL, and LCL in early October. Based on keep, trade, cut values for Superflex leagues, a fair value for Javonte Williams would be quarterback Jordan Love, running back Nick Chubb, wide receiver DJ Moore, and wide receiver Jerry Jeudy. So, Vig, how concerned are you with Williams' recovery from his injury? And based on those values, would you trade for or trade away running back Javonte Williams?
Joe, I'm sorry. You're not going to be very happy with me. But look, I think oh, man. So I think here's the challenge. I think Javonte Williams is going to be long-term quite fine. But he had a pretty severe injury, hurt a lot of ligaments that are really important for stability. I think stability of the knee, that is. And I think what a lot of us do is we like, oh, this person came back from an ACL. This person came back from like an ACL. So we always, when we talk about injuries, we have to think about what does the injury mean for that position? Like an ACL for a running back, way, way more important, like a tight end or a lineman or even a quarterback, right? They depend so much on that ability to cut, to like generate speed. And some of those things just really get affected. Historically, running backs just don't do really, really well in that first year that they come back. Think about like Saquon, think about J.K. Dobbins. I think Matt Betts from the Fantasy Footballers had a great article about running backs and ACL injuries. I think Williams will be fine. You just have to temper your expectations. I'm not saying he won't be great this year. He very well could be. But for him to be great this year would be a statistical outlier. And it's just the sort of thing that I don't want to take a huge gamble on. If I have him on my roster and I don't think I'm a contender this year, I'm keeping him because I think there's potential for him to be good this year. But next year, I'm really, really excited for what he could be doing. But if I'm not a contender this year and there is someone who's willing to bite, I might really be looking to trade away Javonte Williams.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm not that upset. I was actually, hoping that the Broncos would not play Javonte this year, just because I did see, what happened with J.K. Dobbins as he, they tried to rush him back. He had to go through another procedure. Then even when he did come back last year, he just didn't look the same. Obviously, he didn't have that breakaway speed as it kind of fizzled out on those long runs that he had. But that is interesting that you said. I definitely, have tempered my expectations. I see that they're expecting him ready for the start of the season now. So, but with these values, I think, some of these guys, I might be willing to. I'd want to like trade for them. I think, especially with Dynasty, Nick Chubb isn't getting any younger. I think I would, even though he's going to be really good, if you're not on a contending team, if you could trade him away and get Javonte Williams back, I think you'd be pretty happy.
Yeah, I agree. I just have to say, like, that's the way to think about this sort of stuff, in my opinion. Like, if I'm not going to win this year, or if I need to win this year, maybe, sure, right, go ahead, grab Nick Chubb. But if I'm not going to win this year, then I'm fine just sitting and holding on to Javonte or picking him up at cheap if someone else thinks he's cheap. But it's just hard. A lot of people just really value this guy pretty highly.
Yeah, I think I agree with you guys. And I think when it comes to Dynasty, it does really determine, like, are you in a rebuilding mode or are you winning now? I kind of would want to take the gamble on Javonte Williams. He's only 23 years old. I know he did suffer that bad leg injury, so you may have to have him redshirt, if you will, for this season. And hopefully in future, the year after this, he starts to become the Javonte Williams of old. He'll only be 24 years old at that point. So to me, I would take the gamble. We don't know what's going to happen with DJ Moore in Chicago. I think he could be better, but who really knows? I think Jordan Love's value is just astronomically high in Superflex leagues. And then when it comes to Chubb, does he have 1 year left in the tank? Maybe two. And then, Joe, who knows about Jerry Jeudy, subject to trade rumors. He's got a 5th-year option, but will they even keep him on the team? So I would take the gamble and acquire Javonte Williams.
So you would even trade Jerry Jeudy for Javonte?
I would. Yeah, I would take the gamble.
Oh, interesting.
I think I could. Actually, that'd be interesting. I don't know if I could get like Jerry, if I could get like something plus, Javonte plus something to trade away Jerry Jeudy, but I don't have that situation right now. I don't have either one of those players, so I can't test it out. Next up is a very polarizing player in quarterback Trey Lance. Former first-round pick suffered a broken fibula, tore his deltoid and sesamoid, if I'm even saying that, Vig, you'll tell me, ligaments.
You got it right.
Okay, ligaments in his ankle in late September. Also recently, to my surprise, we've heard reports that Lance has been hampered by a hairline fracture on his throwing hand that he suffered during his rookie year, that he's finally recovered, supposedly, based on comments by head coach Kyle Shanahan. Based on keep trade cut values for Superflex leagues, a fair value for Trey Lance would be quarterback Geno Smith, running back Rachaad White, running back Zach Charbonnet, and wide receiver Amari Cooper. So, Vig, how concerned are you with Lance's recovery from these injuries? And based on those values, would you trade for or trade away quarterback Trey Lance?
Well, it's a good question. Let's just talk about the injury. I'm actually not that worried. He's had plenty of time. The fibula is not the major load-bearing bone. I mean, speaking from my own experience, I broke my fibula and had a high ankle sprain / ankle dislocation many years ago, and actually came back. When I say many years ago, I was already 30 at this point, and I came back and was able to play sports even better. And I didn't have access to the elite athleticism, the sort of trainers, the support, the physical therapists, the rehab, the doctors that he has. I'm not worried about him at all from an injury standpoint. The hairline fracture thing was on his throwing hand finger, it looks like, and didn't allow him to properly grip or bend the ball. So whatever he was doing, he was playing through, not being able to get to his mechanics, it sounds like. So it looks like that's going to be a thing of the past as well. I mean, the bigger question is really what do you do if you are the 49ers and that really relatively crowded quarterback room? So I think that's the challenging question. I don't have a clear answer. It all depends on how training camp and everything goes. But from an injury standpoint, I'm not really worried about Trey Lance anymore. I think that this is an injury that a quarterback can recover from very well, especially given how early it happened in the year last year. But then Purdy did so well, right? This is really challenging. From a trade standpoint, though, I don't know. I think that, in dynasty leagues, I'm often looking at 2 to 3 year windows. Y'all have heard of and maybe seen it yourself, people who are just oh yeah, he's young, he's a prospect, I'm going to have this young squad. And they have these young squads forever that never win, right? You're always keep maintaining this really young roster and you maybe get to the playoffs, but you never win. You need some win now players. And I don't know, in Superflex leagues, is Geno Smith going to be that QB2 that, could potentially be the guy who helps you I'm not saying he's going to be the elite guy, but he showed us what he could do last year. I could potentially see myself, depending on my roster construction, grabbing Geno Smith and something else, right? It wouldn't just be I'm sure I could convince someone, oh yeah, give me Geno Smith plus something for Trey Lance.
Yeah, I think more concerning, like you said, other than his injury, is what are the 49ers going to do? And does he end up getting traded? And if he gets traded, who does he end up going to? We haven't seen a lot of Trey Lance either on the field. As Steve knows, I've been kind of out on him. So if I'm looking to compete now, I'd be fine, trading Trey Lance away and getting any of these guys in return.
So you are talking to a former Trey Lance owner who drafted him in the first round, was very high on him, and probably as of, what was it, Joe? 2 days ago, I finally traded him away. I didn't want to do it. I had some attachment issues. I didn't know whether to keep him or not, but I ended up trading him away. I would trade him away. That's what I would tell you. At this point, I think Lance could be a really good player, but the problem is there's been so much mixed signals from that 49ers front office. I want Lance out of San Francisco. I know that he has a great supporting cast there, and he would do really well if he was the guy. But you got Purdy. Now you got the buzz on Darnold. At this point, I viewed Lance as a sunk cost. And honestly, I'm actually surprised you can still get this value from Trey Lance. So to me, this is where the buck stops. If you want to get something for Trey Lance, this is the time. If you wait till after next season, I don't know. I think your shot might be gone unless he gets traded somewhere, he goes somewhere else, and then the appeal gets back up again. But like you said, like, I mean, Geno Smith, I want to say he was like a top 5 quarterback last year, which no one saw. They got Jackson Smith and Jigma now on top of already having Lockett and DK Metcalf. So to me, it's like, okay, you get a guy like that who can help you compete. Cooper, I think, he was a wide receiver 1, probably will be again this year. And then a lot of intrigue with Rachaad White and Zach Charbonnet. The rookie with Charbonnet, he has to contend with Kenneth Walker. But yeah, I would trade away Trey Lance at this point. Michael Thomas has dealt with injuries since 2020 and hasn't been able to stay on the field. Most recently, he suffered a dislocated toe, which ended his season. He'll be 30 years old this season and has dealt with nagging ankle injuries. Based on keep trade cut values for Superflex leagues, a fair value for Michael Thomas would be quarterback Ryan Tannehill, wide receiver Michael Gallup, wide receiver Curtis Samuel, and tight end Luke Schoonmaker. So, Vig, how concerned are you with Thomas for recovery from these injuries? And based on those values, would you trade for or trade away wide receiver Michael Thomas?
When we talk about Michael Thomas, anyone who has seen anything I've said about it, and not just me, a lot of the medical folks, a couple of years ago, there was this really big divide, I think, between people who saw Michael Thomas, the player, the athleticism, his production, and the medical folks. The medical folks were just really worried. We were like, none of this sounds good at any age, let alone like someone who's getting closer to being on the wrong side of 30. 2 years ago, even like before the Fantasy Football Expo, they had like a Dynasty trade session. And I remember going up and talking to the folks after, and I was like, man, I don't know. I'm not excited for Michael Thomas. I'm really worried from an injury standpoint. If he can ever get back to the production he's had and you all expect him to do, because we do that all the time, right? Maybe it's the Madden culture. We all like our players get injured in Madden and then they come back and they performed exactly like they used to, because injuries don't like actually matter. They're just like, oh, you're injured. You're out 8 weeks. Ninth week, you're back and you're great. So for 2 years, I've been saying, man, and I don't roster Michael Thomas anywhere, to be honest with you. I just was like, I don't think the injury stuff is good news at all for him. So this might surprise you, but I would trade Michael Thomas for any of these people, because here's what I think. I would trade for Michael Thomas, what I'm saying. Like, I mean, I just don't see Curtis Samuel or Luke or like, Michael Gallup potentially as being these league winner players. And this is all buzz and pure hype. But he has finally had enough time to potentially recover. And even if he is a shell of himself, my question is, would I take a 75% effective Michael Thomas with Derek Carr throwing the ball? Would I take that over Tannehill, Gallup, Samuel, or Luke Schoonmaker? And the answer is yes, I would, even at 75% effectiveness, which I think is where he might be at maybe worst potentially. I think that the guy has, this was like a top 2 wide receiver for how many years, like in a row, or top 3 for many, many years. I think that he is in a setup to where he has league winning potential for me. And so I buy the upside in an attempt to win now with Michael Thomas, because none of these other folks are going to help me win now. Now, if I've decided that I am not contending at all, sure, I could try to like trade him for someone else, but in what world is this happening? Is anyone trying to get Michael Thomas these days, or any day? I don't know. So weird answer. But I think for the value you could get, since no one really seems to want him, I actually think that Michael Thomas might be a nice little steal this year.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I tend to agree with you with these. His value for trading him away. I don't really like it either. I guess if you're not contending, maybe you trade him away for a guy like Schoonmaker or Gallup. But like you said, their upside just really isn't there. So it would be interesting, if he, like you said, if he's able to return from his injuries and be somewhat effective. He's got Derek Carr there now in New Orleans, and the receiver room isn't that deep, so he really could thrive there with Carr as the quarterback. I think it makes sense. I think with these values, I might trade for him as well.
I've been out on Michael Thomas for a long, long time. And I don't know if you remember this, Joe, but like one of our first videos there, like week 1 or 2, Michael Thomas had 2 really great weeks. And I'm like, sell him now. You need to trade him away. He's going to get injured again. Get as much as you can. Well, he got injured, dislocated his toe. Then he was done for the year. I actually was surprised how low. I actually thought that, and Keep Trade Cut being a crowdsourcing platform, I actually thought that his value would be a lot higher. But I guess everybody must be out on him, because if you look at these values, we're not talking a lot here. So I'm with you guys. at this point, like even though I don't like him, if I only have to give up Michael Gallup to be able to get him, then sure, why not? I mean, like you said, he has that potential. I mean, he was the Justin Jefferson of 4 or 5 years ago until he just hit this cliff and then has not been able to stay on the field. So now there were draft picks here. If I could get some sort of draft capital for him, maybe like a future second or something, I'm not that optimistic about him. So I'm not like, if someone was really wanting him, I probably would be willing to trade him away. But for these values, I certainly would trade for him. Tua Tagovailoa suffered multiple concussions last season, causing him to miss multiple games and the playoffs. The league has put a stronger emphasis on concussions, and in recent comments, Tua even mentioned the possibility of retirement with his family, but opted to continue to play. The Dolphins recently accepted his fifth-year option, and he's currently 25 years old. Based on keep trade cut values for Superflex leagues, a fair value for Tua would be quarterback Dak Prescott, running back Kenneth Walker, wide receiver Cooper Kupp, or a 2024 mid-first. So Vig, how concerned are you with Tua's recovery from these concussions? And based on those values, would you trade for or trade away quarterback Tua Tagovailoa?
These values are ridiculous. So I'm going to take a step back. Injury standpoint, I don't care. Like, these are concussions. I think he's going to be fine. The league, like you said, has better emphasis on it. The team's going to try to protect him. I'm not worried from an injury standpoint. I think Tua is going to be Tua. I'm not saying he's going to be like the number 1 quarterback or like the number 24. You're going to get what you're going to get with Tua Tagovailoa. But what that is you're going to get a guy who's throwing the ball to Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill, right? Like the number 2 and number 7 PPR wide receivers. Folks who still ended up number 2 or number 7, even when Tua was out and they were getting the ball thrown to them by second string and third string quarterbacks. So Tua's value, I think, really comes from the fact that he has Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle's fantasy production baked in to what he's doing. And that doesn't even count like whatever, like whatever they do with a tight end standpoint, or like, do they start throwing the ball to their running backs a little bit? So I think that this is ridiculous value. I would gladly grab Tua if I had to give up Dak Prescott. And this is Superflex, right? Or Kenneth Walker, who now, like, post-draft, Kenneth Walker is not in the greatest of running back rooms. Cooper Kupp, this one's interesting. Cooper Kupp is someone I'd want in a win-now team for this year or next, potentially. I don't know that Cooper Kupp's going to be the same person we had, a couple years ago from the Super Bowl season, or even everyone's talking about the 2024 draft class, and you have it mid-first, but like, who knows what that mid-first is end up going to be? I don't want to gamble that much. Tua is a young quarterback who has great wide receivers tied to him for at least 2 to 3 years. He has easy QB1 potential if he plays the whole year. Concussions are freak accidents. It's not like it's like going to happen again and again sort of thing. It's not like, I repeatedly injure my right ankle, it's going to happen again. This is not one of those things. So I would gladly pick up Tua Tagovailoa anywhere that I can. If these are the actual values, that if this is all I have to trade away to get him, I would gladly do it.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think I'd be, based on these values, I think I'd be trading for him as well. Cooper Kupp's one interesting guy, but this easily could be the last year we see Stafford and Kupp with the Rams. Well, at least Stafford anyways, throwing him the ball with the Rams. And then, is it Stetson Bennett? Is it going to be somebody else? So, there's a lot of question marks there. And I think Tua, could be okay with the concussions. I hear that he's learning how to fall so that when he does fall backwards, he's not snapping his head back. He's been working on strengthening his neck as well. So, yeah, I think based on these values, I'd be trading for Tua. I think he'll return and be fine this year.
Wow, I gotta say, I'm a little surprised, Vig. I thought for sure you were gonna be like, stay away from him. To me, I guess maybe I'm caught up in like the media hysteria when it comes to like everyone is like, oh, concussions in the NFL. But like, is he not like one concussion away from like being done, or is that just the media, being the media?
I think that's the media being the media. There are folks who've had way more concussions than Tua Tagovailoa and continue to play, and we're always in the league because the league just didn't care as much, or whatever that is. I don't know all the details behind it. I saw the movie, but what does it actually mean? I just think that the team knows that the spotlight's on them. They're going to do everything possible. There's like a new helmet for quarterbacks. It's supposed to help things even more. I just think that if you anticipate that Tua as a starting quarterback, if he's going to play the majority of the games, and we have no reason to suspect that the Dolphins are not going to want to start him every single game. It's just he's still throwing the ball to incredibly, incredibly talented wide receivers. And they are both projected to be, like, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle are still projected to be both top 15 wide receivers by practically everyone. And if they're going to be top 15 each, the guy throwing them the football has to be like a top 12 sort of producer. And I don't know that Dak Prescott guarantees me a QB1 role. I know Kenneth Walker was great and huge fan of the guy. His situation just got really murky after the draft. I just feel like if this is all I have to give up, in fact, if I'm giving up Kenneth Walker, the way things are with Tua, I'm sure I could get Tua plus something else. And if it was pre-draft, I could have really gotten way more. So I hear you. An older version of me would have said, I don't know about Tua. I've never been a huge fan of him from just a leading a team to a Super Bowl. But from a fantasy standpoint, I think Tua certainly has incredible ceiling.
Wow, I was not expecting that, and honestly, you're swaying me right now, because I was gonna say I was gonna trade him away. He hasn't been able to stay healthy. He came in with that hip injury that people were concerned about. Played 10 games in 2020, 10 games in 13 games in 2021, and then 13 games in 2022. We know Tyreek Hill says he wants to retire in 2025. I don't know if I could get Dak Prescott plus. Dak's, I think, going to be the quarterback in Dallas for a long time. He's got CeeDee Lamb, got Brandon Cooks for this year, or at least for the short term. I don't know. I think I might be interested in taking Dak Prescott plus, or reset the quarterback clock, get a 2024 first next year, and hopefully somehow, some way, maybe I can package to get a Caleb Williams, or a lot of people like that Drake May. Maybe I just hit the reset button, but that's interesting. I don't know. I at this point I would trade him away, but I might after hearing what you have to say, I might have to reconsider.
Yeah, I think the one thing with that though, Steve, I mean, even if you get those guys, in the next year's draft, you don't know what those guys are going to turn into. I mean, we've been seeing what Tua has been capable on the field with the weapons in Miami. If he stays healthy, he's still only 25. They picked up his 5th-year option. Miami seems to believe in keeping him there. So, I don't know. It's kind of risky with those other guys you potentially drafted in 2024.
Wow. I guess the media just scared me, so I don't know what.
That's what they're designed to do, and it's working.
Tony Pollard suffered a broken fibula and a high ankle sprain during the playoff game against the 49ers. There's been a lot of buzz surrounding Pollard this season after the Cowboys released running back Ezekiel Elliott. Based on keep trade cut values for Superflex leagues, a fair value for Tony Pollard would be quarterback Daniel Jones, running back Josh Jacobs, running back Najee Harris, or wide receiver Jordan Addison. So, Vig, how concerned are you with Pollard's recovery from these injuries? And based on those values, would you trade for or trade away running back Tony Pollard?
Well, this is a good question. So from an injury standpoint, I'm really not worried at all. Part of the reason is because of the nature of the injury. Again, this is very similar to my own injury. Mine was a little worse, and I am no elite athlete, and I came back better than I was before just because I was finally doing like better rehab and conditioning. This guy has access to elite everything, and he is himself, of course, very elite. We've seen what a healthy Tony Pollard can do. But here's why I'm like really high on him. The Cowboys, they are giving this guy $10 million in guaranteed money, right? This whole franchise tag business. They like cut Ezekiel Elliott. Like, you don't do that without having the confidence from an injury standpoint that the dude is fine. Like, you just don't do that with a running back with a bad injury. And it's not that bad an injury. And I think he's going to be just fine. The value equation, that's going to be a little different, running backs are tough to value sometimes because they're always just an injury away from like completely falling off the cliff, right? Like, who had Josh Jacobs as one of the leads, and he was the leading rusher last year, right? Who had him as the leading rusher? And a lot of that was because of other injuries, right? Like, folks were out or couldn't play, and Josh did well, not to discredit him at all. And Najee Harris was someone who everyone thought was going to do really well and sort of like didn't quite have the year that you expected him to. So, It's really, really hard to know where this value is going to be. But I think that if people are worried about Tony Pollard's injury and are willing to trade him away, I would trade for him. I don't know that Daniel Jones is really gonna. I know they've tried to give him more weapons up there in New York. I don't know that he's going to be that fantastic. Maybe like a QB2 overall, which could be great value, in terms of a super flex league if you don't have other quarterbacks. But Josh Jacobs, he isn't a run first offense out there. I don't know if he's going to replicate what he did last year. There's a new quarterback situation, of course, with Jimmy Garoppolo. So there's some unknowns there. But I think Josh Jacobs is someone that I think I would take Josh Jacobs over Pollard. I think I would take Pollard over Najee Harris, which sounds sort of weird, right? Both sort of young running backs. But Tony Pollard, when he's healthy, which I think he will be, is just such an incredible football player. And I just have been very uneasy with the Steelers over the last couple of years and seeing what they're doing and from a fantasy standpoint. So it's a bit tough. And again, it all depends on roster construction, but I really think that Pollard is a great sort of buy low if people are truly worried about his injury, which it's hard to say. Every league is a little different, but it does seem like some people are pretty worried about his injury recovery.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I would trade for Tony Pollard with the first two guys, Daniel Jones and Josh Jacobs. But then, I think I'd trade Pollard away to get Najee Harris or Jordan Addison.
Interesting. Yeah, for me, I would trade away Tony Pollard in a heartbeat. I am not on the Tony Pollard hype train. I know what you're saying, Vig. They cut Zeke. Everything looks like he should handle the load. The injury shouldn't be a problem, which that's good. That's good information. I'm gonna store that in and know that for going forward. But he's never had over 200 rushing attempts. I'm concerned about that. I don't know if he will, especially coming off the injury. I would think that maybe, and you could dispute this, but I think they may ease him in. They may not give him 20, 25 carries as of week one, even though, as we've been talking about, Joe, Mike McCarthy wants to run the football. I need to see it to believe it first when it comes to Mike McCarthy's offensive philosophy. But I'm big on Najee Harris. There's not often that when it comes from volume, that's what we want in running backs. We want volume. And Najee Harris has that running backfield on lockdown. So does Josh Jacobs. You could say the same thing with Tony Pollard, but Tony Pollard is 26 years old. I'd say usually around that 27, 20 years old, that's when running backs start to hit the cliff. And he's only on the franchise tag. If the Cowboys, want to use him this year and be like, hey, thanks for your service, see you later, where does he go from there? At least with Najee Harris, I know that he's got, most likely 2 more years, if not a 5th-year option year with the Pittsburgh Steelers. So I definitely would take Najee Harris over Pollard and Jordan Addison as well. I think he's got a lot of potential being across with Justin Jefferson. I get to reset the wide receiver clock with him being a rookie. I would take Jacobs over him. They're probably close, but I'd like the performance. But I would take Pollard over Daniel Jones. But for 3 out of 4 of these guys, I would trade away Pollard. All right, so lastly, we have quarterback Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray suffered a torn ACL, and he also tore his meniscus. The surgery was completed in January. There's much speculation if Kyler Murray even plays in the 2023 season. Based on keep trade cut values in Superflex leagues, a fair value for Kyler Murray would be quarterback C.J. Stroud, quarterback Deshaun Watson, running back Jahmyr Gibbs, or wide receiver T. Higgins. So, Vig, how concerned are you with Kyler's recovery from these injuries? And based on those values, would you trade for or trade away quarterback Kyler Murray?
Yeah, I think, big picture, we talk about ACL injuries not being as important for quarterbacks as it is for running backs. And I think that holds true. We haven't talked a lot about the meniscus. The meniscus is actually more important than people think. The menisci, I guess, you have 2 of them on each side, the lateral and medial meniscus, help really stabilize the knee, or rather not stabilize. They're like the shock absorbers for the knee, we should say. The ligaments help stabilize, but those are the shock absorbers. And Kyler's a pretty mobile quarterback. Here's the reason I'm not worried about the injury per se. Because I think that the Cardinals are not expecting him to be a factor this year. Maybe they ease him in towards the end, get him some game time. But the Cardinals are not favored to win a single game next year. They are the underdog in every single game. Vegas, right now, Vegas is predicting the Cardinals to pretty much lose every single game. And so the team knows that. They don't have a great team. They know they're not contending this year. So do they rush Kyler? No, I think that they really let Kyler recover as much as possible. Reports coming out of their camp is that he's recovering sort of well. We've seen him he's been squatting and stuff at like 13 weeks out from the injury. So I just think the team takes it easy on him. So I think the challenge is like, what do you do with Kyler Murray? It really depends. Expect him to be a non-factor for 2023. He may come in and play a few games for you later, but like he's probably going to ride the bench or the IR for me if I have him rostered. So the question really becomes 2024. Do I think Kyler Murray could be a top 12 quarterback in 2024? That is really hard to predict that far in the future, but we know he has the tools and the skill set to be a QB1. I mean, prior to this, like a couple years ago, they were saying he was going to be the QB1. And so I think that from an overall like value standpoint, he's a wash for this season. If I have him and I could get something really great, that's fine. If I'm like in win now mode, I trade away Kyler Murray, no question. I think I like T. Higgins. I want to say I like the idea of Jahmyr Gibbs, CJ Stroud as a first year rookie quarterback. It's a bit of a challenge to know what's going to happen. I might actually just keep Kyler. Like if I'm win now, I don't want Stroud. So it's really hard to say. Again, depends on like roster construction. But as long as you know that Kyler is going to be, in my opinion, a non-factor for this year, I'm fine with keeping him.
Yeah, that's interesting to know. He's, planning on him being a non-factor this year. I've really been out on Kyler. I'm not the biggest fan of his, and even if he comes back in 2024, I still don't really know what weapons he's going to have to throw to. So I'm honestly comfortable just moving on from him and trading him away for any of these guys with the values that Keep Trade Cut has.
Yeah, interestingly enough, we share our injury history. I also tore my ACL, and partially tore my meniscus, not all of it. So I know what Kyler's going through. But when it comes to Kyler, here's what I'm concerned about. And maybe, again, you may debunk this. But his fantasy production, a lot of it relies on his running ability. So, as he ages, he's probably not going to be doing that as much. But if you look over the past few years, in 2019, he had 93 attempts. 2020, he had 133 attempts, which, I think was his best season. 2021, 88 attempts. And 2022, 67 attempts, but he played less games due to the injury. So I'm concerned about Kyler Murray moving forward. DeAndre Hopkins most likely is going to be off the team. So I would definitely trade him away. I know probably people don't really want Watson because of the off the field stuff, and it's kind of icky, but I still think that, from a fantasy perspective, I think Watson he's got a decent supporting cast now around him. I think, he should, perform like or at least close to what he was before in Houston. So I would definitely trade away Murray for Watson, Gibbs, and Higgins. Stroud's an interesting one. That's the one that I'm kind of waffling about. When it comes to Stroud, I feel he's kind of a vanilla quarterback. He's got good accuracy, but is he going to be kind of like a Matt Ryan type? But when it comes to fantasy production, is CJ Stroud really the type of guy that could be a league winner or a top 5 quarterback? I'm not sure. I might be inclined to hold on to Kyler Murray, and then because right now, I would say his value is probably the lowest it's ever been. So, maybe once he gets healthy and he's about to start, maybe then I would trade him away. But for those other 3, that's enticing. I would definitely move him away for those guys.
Yeah, and I think part of the problem here, in my mind at least, the reason why I said I'd keep him is I just don't see a world where any of these trades happen. Who is giving you Watson, Gibbs, or Higgins for Kyler Murray right now? I know Keep Trade Cut is supposed to be crowdsourced. It is crowdsourced, and it's supposed to be reasonable. And I think for this entire show, I think I've been thinking of what's practical, because do you all see this happening in any Dynasty league? Is there anyone who's giving away T. Higgins, Jahmyr Gibbs for Kyler Murray? No one's doing that, right? Everyone's talking about he doesn't play this season, or if he does, he plays towards the end and they ease him in and just get him back to game speed a little bit. I don't see these trades happening, which is probably why I said I just keep him. But you're right. Kyler Murray, I think so much of his value comes from his running ability. I don't think it'll be that hampered overall. I think, he's going to run the same way any other sort of aging quarterbacks tends to slow down with how much they rush the ball. But and yeah, we have no idea what the weapons are going to be, but the team is pretty invested in him, and the teams are still going to want to win. So I have a feeling they'll try to build around him still, but I just don't see any of these trades happening in real life.
Yeah, it's interesting. I want to say, like, in startup drafts, I can't say this for sure because I've been a part of a few, but I want to say Murray might have been taken before these other guys in like a type of a super flex startup draft. So, I mean, that's not necessarily like the best representation.
Sure.
But I think I'm with you. I think probably the Stroud one is the closest that you might
Mhm.
see someone do that trade, would you say?
I think so, because you're right, because CJ Stroud's such an enigma. But honestly, I see people taking a chance on a rookie with super high draft capital over a guy coming off an injury who's not going to pay this year. So I don't know. Leagues it's so hard to know what's actually going to happen because everyone values their players differently. And like, but I can see CJ Stroud actually being the toughest one to pull off because people have there's such ageism in Dynasty, right? Like people hit 24, 25 and are like, oh, they're old. And I'm like, man, I was 24, 25 like a decade ago. So it's really, really hard to say. I actually, when I was going through this, I was like, CJ Stroud might be the toughest one to give up because I don't know who's giving him up because if someone drafted him, they just used like a top 3 pick to grab him in their rookie draft, right? So like, do you trade Kyler Murray for a 101, 102, 103? I don't know.
Yeah, probably not. I think that's a fair point. And, if you're, I don't see anyone really trying to use those other guys that are on the board to acquire Murray either. I think they would definitely be more so lowballing the current Kyler Murray owner way more than those keep trade cut values are showing there.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what my thought process is usually, position to position trading is typically, easier than going, cross position. So, and then Watson, he's a weird one. I don't know. I don't know what people would do with him. I mean, he looked horrible last year. Maybe with a full off season, training camp, what have you. Maybe he ends up, performing better. But he's also a guy that, I mean, there's a huge commitment by the Browns, but can he turn around what we saw last year? So that concludes speed trading for players who suffered an injury last season and currently are in recovery. Before we sign off, Big, thanks for coming on again. Where can others find your great work?
Oh, I don't know that there's much great work, but just you can just a Pretend GM show. You can follow Alfredo Brown at the Pretend GM. On Twitter, and you'll see a lot of my work with him. I'm Dr.Vig on Twitter, and I'll talk about fantasy football. I don't post a lot specifically about it, but if you will tag me and ask me questions, I am more than happy to answer and reply to any and all questions that you ask, even though I don't post a ton really on that account since it's mostly like a doctor account. And yeah, you can just follow football guys in general. They do a lot of great work, I think. I was happy to be a part of their team. They have content about all sorts of stuff too, but follow us any of those places.
Awesome. Well, if you enjoyed this video, we ask you to please like it. You can comment below with your trade requests and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We also recently have joined Apple and Spotify podcasts. You can follow us there as well. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time.